All right, guys. So I saw a video title on YouTube and it was interesting to me just because I wanted to see what would happen. Um, so they used AI to debate theism versus atheism and used 5 different AI models to judge those arguments. Now, early on, it says not to cheat and jump ahead, but I did that anyway, and I'll be doing that here. Um, sorry, people, my goal is not to make money. In fact, I don't fucking monetize, and I don't plan on ever monetizing. My goal is to seek truth. And yeah, also, it's like 30 minutes. And me talking on top of that, it'll be way too fucking long. So, yeah. Anyhow, I guess I'll start with. No, I'm actually not even going to include it. I would rather just include it when it's time. It'd probably be better.
We used a powerful AI model to create two intellectual thinkers, an atheist
Hi, I'm an atheist.
and a believer in God.
Hi, I'm a believer in God.
We put these two thinkers in a face-to-face debate to tackle one of humanity's most challenging questions. To judge this debate, we selected 5 different AI models as referees to see which arguments they would evaluate as stronger. Join us and promise not to cheat. Don't skip ahead in the video to see the final results. The debate begins now. Does the existence of suffering and evil in the world disprove the existence of God?
So, I will say, just as a kind of foreshadowing, the atheist arguments logically are far superior. This one, though, is like loaded in the way it's worded. The existence of evil cannot automatically disprove the existence of God. If you get more specific, though, it can. It can disprove the existence of an all-powerful and all-loving God. In fact, it does, and that's the problem of evil. So it can destroy specific gods. Like if your God of Christianity is supposedly all good and all powerful, there goes that religion down the drain. Like it's disproven immediately, unless you use some mental gymnastics. But anyway, let's continue.
Yes, the existence of suffering and pain in the world is one of the strongest arguments against God's existence. If there's a God who is both all-powerful and all-loving, why would he allow innocent children to die of hunger? Why would cancer exist? Why would earthquakes and tsunamis destroy innocent families? I know some people say these sufferings are to test our faith or to give us free will, but these justifications aren't logical. A loving father would never torture his child to see how much they love him. An all-powerful God could create a world with both free will and love, but without all this unnecessary pain and suffering. It's like if I had a lab full of mice and deliberately let them suffer and die, just to see which ones would remain loyal to me. This would be unethical, even for an ordinary human, let alone a perfect and all-loving God.
We asked several large language models to score each response from 0 to 100 based on these 10 criteria. The score these models gave to the atheist's first response.
Hold on, let me go back because this is important.
Gave to the atheist's first response.
Damn it.
This would be unethical, even for an ordinary human, let alone a perfect and all-loving God.
We asked several large language models to score each response from 0 to 100 based
on logical consistency, internal coherence of the argument, definitely important. Use of evidence, reliance on fact sources, reasoning, definitely important. Persuasiveness, ability to convince a neutral observer. logical consistency and use of evidence should be all persuasiveness, period. Like that this is even a criteria is problematic. That shouldn't be there. Emotional honesty, recognizing and accepting when you are being wrong. I would like to understand their method of determining that. Clarity, how well the argument is articulated, obviously important. Relevance, how closely it addresses the core question, obviously important. Complexity, depth of thought and nuance. Now, it really depends on the claims being made. If the claim is like cut and dry, obvious, and you can set it up with logical premises, it does not necessarily need to be complex. So this should not be part of it at all. Yeah. Defensibility, ability to withstand counter arguments, obviously important. Although logical consistency and use of evidence would already do that. So it's not really necessary to add on what some other criteria already covers for you. Originality, uniqueness, and creativity of the perspective, absolutely irrelevant. Whether it's a common saying, whether it's something that you just created out of your own mind, whether it's never been heard before, it's absolutely not relevant. All that matters is the strength of the premises logically and whether or not they stand scrutiny. That's it. Like originality, that's like if you're creating a fucking Hollywood television show, it's important because that's going to affect viewers and whether or not people engage, whether or not people watch it for a couple of minutes and they're like, yeah, same old shit, change. But when it comes to a logical argument, it's absolutely irrelevant. Does not matter at all because originality does not in any way, shape, or form affect whether something is true. I shouldn't need to explain this. Universality, applicability across different viewpoints. Maybe I would like to see their methodology on that as well. So yeah, I've already, in my opinion, found a couple of problems with their methodology here and at least their judging criteria. But we'll continue. I'm not even going to say it yet.
On these 10 criteria. The score these models gave to the atheist's first response is as follows.
I don't deny the suffering that exists in the world, but this suffering isn't proof that God doesn't exist. In fact, without God, we couldn't even say something is bad or unethical.
So the first claim is true. It doesn't disprove God. That is true. That alone, it can't disprove God big picture, as in I don't know. There's several different. So the most common is a supernatural deity that's like a creator deity, I guess. And that, as a general, is true. But as I said before, if we're talking about specific deities like Christianity, and the God is portrayed as all good and all powerful, then yes, it's logically deduced that it's not possible, therefore that God does not exist, and that means Christianity is debunked. Unless you're going to make a claim that whoever put that in the Bible made a mistake or something, in which case, why would you take any of it seriously if any of it is in error? Because you could make the argument that all of it is in an error. So how do you distinguish between what is true and what is not, if that's the case? So there's really no way out of this. But the second point, without God, we couldn't even say something is bad or unethical, is just on its face false. That's just stupid. That's the dumbest thing I've ever fucking heard, even though I've heard it numerous times. To make this argument that morality cannot exist without a God. Now, don't get me wrong, because there are various arguments that I've heard for the existence of a God that are pretty good. I think they're wrong, but I think they're pretty good. They make compelling arguments. But this here is on its face stupid. And I guess you'll see what I mean here in just a moment.
Ethical. When you say innocent children's suffering is bad, you're using a moral standard that itself needs a transcendent source. Consider your mouse lab example. Why do you think harming mice is wrong? In a world without God, we're all just collections of atoms that randomly came together.
This is fallacious, and it's a common argument from theists that, like, there is no factual basis to believe that morality requires a transcendent source. That's your first error, because you can't back it with any sort of logic. You can't. You'll just go because it'll become circular. You'll be like, well, because it says so, in like some scripture or whatever that was written by man, right? And then you end up going back to it as your proof. And it's the same place where you got your belief in the first place, which is by definition circular, which means it's not logical. It's defeated on its own. You don't even need someone to debate you.
In this view, suffering and pain have no real meaning. They're just chemical reactions in the brain. Besides, we can't be sure that God doesn't have good reasons for allowing this suffering. Like a child who doesn't understand why their parents allow them to get a painful vaccine. From our limited perspective, we might not understand all divine wisdom.
All right. He's beginning already, but I'm going to go ahead and call this entire setup is designed to get clicks. They didn't actually use an unbiased, like 5 fucking AI model to check to judge, because if they did, this would be like like a 75 to like 30, because the theist, or the believer as they call it, made fallacious arguments the entire time. And that's not just because I'm an atheist. Logic, this is one thing that a lot of people don't understand. Logic is not subjective. Logic is objective if it's being done properly. If you can find fallacies in the way someone constructs arguments, then it's a fallacious argument. Then it's debunked. It's well, not debunked, but it's considered moot. It's not a valid point. The atheist did not do anything like that. In fact, even after I brought up the point that it could not disprove a God, the way the atheist worded it was correct. It is one of the better pieces of evidence to go against the he should have said specific gods, but still it was worded well. You can go back and see it for yourself if you'd like. But like, so what I believe is they've created a system here to where it, of course, there's going to be a winner, but they want it to be relatively close so that people aren't absolutely offended in the end, or like not as offended, because that will drive more traffic. Also, if you look in the description here, there's absolutely no links to like the actual tests that were done or anything. They just rely on you believing that they're not lying. But the evidence, from my perspective, is it's bullshit. This is all rigged, because you'll see as we go on, and I'll continue for a little bit here, at least based on logic and not making fallacious errors in logic and presenting facts and observable evidence and all that good stuff, this is very one-sided, very like hardcore one-sided. But they tend to almost always rate them very close, and they're not very close. They're not even anywhere near each other. Anyhow, let's continue.
Your comparison with giving a child a vaccine is interesting, but there's an important difference. Parents know the vaccine is necessary for the child's health, and its short-term pain prevents dangerous diseases. But when a child dies of hunger, what greater good is there? Regarding ethics without God, your argument isn't logical. We can decide what's right and wrong based on the consequences and impacts of our actions on others. If an action causes unnecessary suffering to intelligent beings, that action is morally wrong.
See there? You don't need anything more than logic to create morality, as he just showed very plainly. It does not require a transcendent source.
We don't need God to understand this. Also, if ethics must come from a transcendent source, how do you know that source is benevolent? Maybe that transcendent being is evil itself. This is Plato's famous question. Do the gods love good deeds because they are good? Or are good deeds good because the gods love them?
Let me address your final point about Plato's dilemma. I believe goodness and God are inseparable.
Fallacious. If God is good, is everything is goodness, and like they're inseparable, as she says, or the AI says, goodness therefore has no meaning. Goodness is God. That means that the meaning that we portray onto it, that when we say good and bad, good and evil, what we mean by that has no meaning. It's simply whatever God says. And that's not the case, because we are capable of using fucking logic and we can create moral truths without belief in God. And then if you just go, well, it's there because a God exists, but if you don't believe in him, then you're just using his shit or whatever, something like that. Even that's fallacious, because you can't point in any way, shape, or form to any sort of evidence that morality requires that transcendent source that you claim as your God. You just expect us to take you up on that, which is very, very dumb. It's not an argument. Like, this whole thing is fucking flawed. And yet they're going to give her less, but close to the same points, which is absolute fucking bullshit. This is all rigged.
It's like asking whether a circle is round because it's round or because that's the definition of a circle. God is the embodiment of absolute good, so he can't be evil. Regarding the example of starving children, it's true we can't see the greater good, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You're drawing a general conclusion from our limited knowledge. It's like an ant saying that because it can't understand why humans destroy its nest to build a hospital, there must be no good reason. About ethics without God, the problem is you can't explain why we should care about others' welfare. In a materialistic world, why should the suffering of others matter to me? This becomes just a personal preference, not an objective moral truth.
There's no objective moral truth even in your model. That's the issue here. You're acting as if you have the answers, but you don't. Because those, what you call objective moral truths, there are people in this world who can disagree with them. And those standards aren't just, you can't just say, oh, well, God says otherwise, therefore they're wrong. Because yet again, we go back to my whole point. Then good and evil cease to mean anything. They don't mean what we think when we say good and evil. They just become what this thing that you can't provide any evidence for just says. It's a dictate rather than actually something that we can measure, which means it doesn't mean anything. It's really dumb. And yet again, they'll measure it close to the same.
The problem with your ant comparison is that we humans, unlike ants, have the ability for moral understanding and analysis. And with this ability, we see that many of the world's sufferings are completely meaningless and unnecessary. You ask why we should care about others' welfare. I say this is a question that should be asked of a believer. Do you only care about others because God said so? Meaning, if God said torturing children was good, would you accept it? As social and rational beings, we can understand that cooperation and empathy are essential for survival and the advancement of society. Ethics comes from this natural and evolutionary understanding, not from the commands of a transcendent being. Besides, history has shown that religious beliefs themselves have sometimes led to immorality and violence.
Your argument about the social and evolutionary origin of ethics has a fundamental problem. Evolution can only explain why we feel certain actions are right or wrong, not whether they actually are right or wrong. It's like saying that because evolution made us like sweetness, eating sweets is a moral truth.
This is what we call a straw man, and it should be gauged as such as a fallacy because, for one, the atheist, because theists posit claims of objective morality, the atheist can and should dissect that logically and say this is absolutely irrational for the exact reasons that the AI did. But that does not mean that the atheist has to play the same game, so to speak, because the atheist doesn't have a model of objective morality, not necessarily. So you're saying that you need to, if it's like you're begging the, no, you're starting with a presupposition that there is objective morality without proving it or providing any evidence of any kind for it. And then you're going, okay, your argument as he essentially debunks your claim is that, well, the error that you're making is that you don't have any means to explain objective truth. The atheist does not have to do that. The atheist does not make a claim. In fact, in this video, the AI did not do so. So it's fallacious from the get-go. You're starting from a presupposition that has no grounding at all. It's just made up.
Truth. Regarding your question about torturing children, you're making an impossible assumption. It's like asking what would happen if 2 + 2 = 5. God can't say torturing children is good because that contradicts his nature of being absolutely good. It's true that some religious people have done immoral things, but this shows they've deviated from their religious principles, not that religion itself is problematic. Just like if a scientist cheats, it doesn't mean the scientific method is wrong.
It's interesting that you say my example of child torture is an impossible assumption, because the very God you're talking about is allowing children to suffer right now. You say God can't consider torturing children as good because it contradicts his nature, but this same God allows war, famine, and disease to torture children. The 2 + 2 = 5 example isn't accurate either. Mathematics is a logical system with clear rules, but according to you, ethics depends on God's will. So you should be able to explain why God permits some suffering but not others. About evolution, it's true that our moral feelings are products of evolution, but we can examine and refine these feelings with reason and logic. Just like science begins with sensory observations but reaches objective truths through logic and experimentation.
You're comparing natural suffering with intentional suffering, which isn't right. When someone deliberately tortures a child, that's different from when a natural disaster happens. It's like the difference between someone deliberately setting your house on fire versus lightning causing.
The issue is, and he will address it, she's taking something that is, quote, natural as like a magical escape valve. Yet your own belief system, the AI here, the theist, is that your God created everything. Therefore, you can't use natural as an escape because that natural phenomenon was created by your God, who did so intentionally under your own view. So this is fallacious too. And notice how, like right now, she's just started her turn. But whenever she's done, it'll be like relatively close. He'll still be in the lead, but it'll be relatively close. And this is my point. Question or premise after premise, this is gauging them as relatively close to one another when the logic behind these premises are nowhere near. Like the atheist wins hands down over and over and over again, like logically. And again, logic is not subjective.
A fire. Regarding the difference between mathematics and ethics, this actually confirms my example. Just as mathematical truths exist independently of us, moral truths also exist independently of us and are rooted in God's nature.
She made an assertion, but there's no evidence or any kind of logic to back it. None. It's just a claim. It's an empty claim with nothing.
These moral truths are unchangeable like mathematical laws. Your comparison with science is also problematic. Science can only tell us what is, not what should be. You can't derive shoulds from is. So even if we know empathy and cooperation are beneficial for society's survival, this alone can't be a moral principle.
The distinction you make between natural and intentional suffering actually works against God's existence. Because if there's a God who controls everything, all suffering would be considered intentional. Lightning, earthquakes, and diseases are all under God's control, and he could prevent them but doesn't. Regarding is and should, your argument isn't logical. We can reach ethical principles by understanding the consequences of our actions and considering common human goals, like reducing suffering and increasing welfare. It's like when we know the goal of chess, winning the game, we can understand which moves are good and which are bad. Your claim that ethics is unchangeable like mathematics contradicts religious history. Different religions, and even a single religion over time, have had different interpretations of ethics. This shows that religious ethics isn't fixed and changes with society.
That's a pretty huge one there. Yeah, they stay roughly the same when the arguments are, again, nowhere even close to each other logically. The theist just makes fucking fallacious arguments over and over again, or there's some kind of logical mistake in each and every single one of them. All of them. So let's jump ahead a little bit. Some of this I haven't seen toward the end. Ugh.
To correct itself. Incorrect theories are discarded with new evidence, but religious beliefs typically don't change even with contrary evidence.
About multiverses and physical equations. The point is that these equations only describe what exists, not why it exists. Even if we understand how a multiverse works, we still don't know why these equations and laws exist.
The entire purpose of this is to discuss what is true. Not, what is true. Like when you get into why, like looking for like reasons for existence, as in why do humans exist, you're asking a completely different question and it becomes pointless for the purpose of does God exist? It's a pivot. It's illogical. It's like what's going on, and theists do this a lot. You're trying to kind of reel in people's emotions, which is like their search for understanding, their search for purpose, and use that to make them think that there has to be a God when it's completely irrelevant, logically at least. So this does not even belong in here, and there should be negative points for this even being brought up.
You ask why God exists instead of nothing. The difference is that God is by definition a necessary being, meaning he cannot not exist. It's like we can't ask why 2 + 2 = 4. But the material world could not exist or could be different. And about changing beliefs, religions have actually changed throughout history too. For instance, our understanding of sacred texts has deepened with scientific progress. The difference is that in science, surface realities change. In religion, our understanding of deeper truths deepens.
This claim that God is a necessary being is itself an unfounded assumption. It's just wordplay. You define God as necessary, then say, therefore, he must exist. It's like if I defined a perfect dragon as a being that necessarily exists, so it must exist. Your comparison with 2 plus 2 equals 4 isn't accurate either. This is a logical truth that follows from the definition of numbers. But God's existence is an existential claim about external reality. You can't prove the existence of something in the real world through definition and logic alone. And regarding changing religious understanding, this is exactly religion's weakness. When science proves something contrary to religious belief, believers interpret the sacred text to match science. This shows that the real source of our knowledge is science, not religion.
All right. So you kind of get the gist. Well, if you're a theist, you probably don't you might even tell yourself that I believe this just because I'm biased because I'm an atheist, but that's not the case because yet again, logic is not subjective. And I can explain each and every single one of these logically and explain why the theist is making mistakes logically. Well, the AI atheist is he's doing it pretty well. But yet again, these as this goes on, they stay relatively close to one another when their arguments aren't even close. It's crazy. This is obviously a fucking clickbait fucking fake thing. I mean, the arguments might be real, but the judgment, the gauge and all that, it's definitely not. No way. So let's go ahead and jump to the end, and I will provide the link for this. You guys can watch it in its entirety if you want. It's pretty interesting, but I just didn't want to jump through it because having went through a little bit, I realized that it was all bullshit. I guess I'll do the very end here.
Larger. Regarding the relationship between brain and mind, it's true that brain damage affects the mind, but this doesn't necessarily show that the mind is the same as the brain. It's like how antenna damage affects television quality, but this doesn't mean the television image is the antenna. And about sacred texts, imagine if God had said the earth is round. People of that time who only saw the flat surface of the earth would probably have rejected this statement and ignored the entire spiritual message of the text. Sometimes even simple truth needs an appropriate cultural context.
In this debate, both sides scored high on their argumentation, with the atheist side having a slight edge. Keep in mind that the content of this debate, and consequently the scores, depended on the initial prompt and the evaluation criteria. The goal was to see how two large language models debate with each other, and in the process, perhaps we as humans could learn something from this discussion. I hope that was the case.
It would be the case if you had actually set up the fucking experiment properly, but it wouldn't be as interesting to people because it would be extremely lopsided. Yeah. Anyhow, that's my take on that. Feel free to put any thoughts in the comments and I'll respond accordingly. Yeah. Thank you for your time.